Jake loved his job at the radio station in the middle of nowhere. While most people thought it was boring, he found peace in the quiet desert nights, listening to signals from space. The small building sat alone under a blanket of stars. Far from any city lights tonight felt different though. The equipment was picking up something strange. He had been working there for 3 years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. The computers were showing patterns that didn't make sense. The signals were too organized, too perfect to be natural. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the screen again. The same weird pattern kept repeating every few minutes. This can't be right, he whispered to himself, adjusting the big dish outside through his computer. The signal got stronger. Whatever was sending this was getting closer. Jake grabbed his coffee mug and took a sip of the cold liquid. He had been working for 12 hours straight, but this discovery was too important to ignore. He started recording everything, knowing that tomorrow his boss would want to see proof. The scientific community would go crazy over this. Suddenly, all the equipment went silent. Every screen turned black. Even the emergency lights went out. The only sound was Jake's heartbeat in the complete darkness. He fumbled for his phone's flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. Everything electronic had died at once. Then he saw it. A soft blue light started glowing outside the windows. It grew brighter and brighter until the whole building was filled with an otherworldly glow. Jake pressed his face against the window and couldn't believe what he was seeing. A massive ship hung in the air above the radio station. It was bigger than any airplane he had ever seen, shaped like a triangle with smooth, glowing edges. The thing made no sound at all. Jake's hands shook as he tried to process what was happening. All those years of listening to space signals, and now something was actually here. The blue light suddenly became blindingly bright. Jake threw his hands over his eyes, but the light seemed to go right through his skin. He felt a strange tingling sensation all over his body, like tiny electric shocks. Then everything went black. When Jake woke up, he wasn't in his radio station anymore. He was lying on a cold, smooth floor that felt like metal but looked like glass. The walls around him curved upward and seemed to glow with their own light. Strange symbols moved across the surfaces like living things. Other people were waking up around him. Jake counted at least 30 others, all looking as confused and scared as he felt. There was an older woman in a nurse's uniform, a young man in work clothes covered in dirt, and a family with 2 small children huddled together. "Where are we?" someone whispered. "I don't know," Jake answered, his voice cracking. "I was working at the radio station, and then there was this light ... I was driving home from the hospital," the nurse said. "My car just stopped working, and then I saw this bright light in the sky." One by one, everyone shared similar stories. They had all seen the same blue light. They had all felt the same tingling sensation. And now they were all here, wherever here was. The room they were in was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly. The air felt thick and had a metallic taste. There were no doors that he could see, just smooth walls that went up and curved into a ceiling high above their heads. Jake tried to stay calm, but his mind was racing. As someone who studied space signals, he knew the chances of alien life existing were high, but he never thought he would meet them like this. He looked around at the other people, all ordinary folks who were just living their normal lives a few hours ago. A low humming sound filled the room. The walls began to glow brighter, and the strange symbols moved faster across the surfaces. Then, without warning, a section of the wall just melted away, creating an opening. Through the opening came creatures that made Jake's blood run cold. They were tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Their heads were too big for their bodies, and their black eyes were enormous, like looking into deep space. They moved without making any sound, gliding across the floor. The people in the room pressed together, parents pulling their children close. Jake wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. One of the creatures stepped forward and opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, Jake heard a voice inside his head, speaking in perfect English. "You are now property of the Galactic Trade Union. You will be processed and assigned to work colonies. Resistance will result in punishment." The words felt like ice water in Jake's brain. He looked around at the other people, and he could tell they had heard the same message. Some were crying, others looked angry, a few seemed to be in shock, staring at nothing. More creatures entered the room, carrying strange devices that looked like collars made of black metal. They began fitting these devices around each person's neck. When they put one on Jake, he felt a weird buzzing in his head, like static from a broken radio. "What's happening to us?" the nurse asked out loud. The creature near her tilted its head. "You are being prepared for transport to mining facilities. Your species shows adequate physical strength for crystal extraction work." Jake's scientific mind was trying to process everything, even through his fear. These beings had technology, beyond anything humans had achieved. They traveled between stars, they could speak directly into people's minds, and they were treating humans like livestock. As more collars were fitted, Jake noticed something strange. The buzzing in his head wasn't as strong as it seemed to be for others. While some people were starting to look dazed and compliant, Jake could still think clearly. His years of working with radio signals and electromagnetic fields might have given him some resistance to whatever the collars were doing. He decided to keep this to himself. If these creatures thought he was as controlled as everyone else, maybe he could find a way to help. Jake had always been good at solving problems, and this was the biggest problem he had ever faced. The creatures began herding the group toward the opening in the wall. Jake walked with the others, but his mind was already working on escape plans. He studied everything around him, memorizing the layout, the technology, the way the creatures moved and communicated. As they were led through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, Jake caught glimpses through transparent walls of the vastness of space outside. They were definitely on a ship, and Earth was nowhere to be seen. The reality of their situation hit him hard. They were truly alone, millions of miles from home, at the mercy of beings who saw them as nothing more than tools. But Jake refused to give up hope. Somewhere in this incredible alien technology, there had to be a weakness. And if there was a way to get everyone home, he was going to find it. Jake woke up feeling like he had been hit by a truck. His body ached all over, and his mouth tasted like metal. The last thing he remembered was being led through those endless corridors on the alien ship. Now he was lying on hard ground under a strange purple sky with two suns beating down on him. He sat up slowly and looked around. They weren't on the ship anymore. This was definitely another planet. The ground was red dirt mixed with weird blue rocks that seemed to glow slightly. In the distance, he could see massive structures that looked like they were built into mountains. The air was thick and hard to breathe, like being at the top of a very tall mountain. Other people were waking up around him. Jake recognized some faces from the ship, the nurse, the family with kids, the young man in work clothes. But there were also new people here, humans who looked like they had been on this planet for a while. Their clothes were dirty and torn, and they had a hopeless look in their eyes that scared Jake more than anything else. "Welcome to hell," said a man with graying hair who was sitting nearby. His voice was rough, like he hadn't had water in days. "Been here 6 months myself. Name's Tom. Used to be a teacher back in Ohio." Jake introduced himself and asked what was happening. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're slaves now, kid. Property of something called the Galactic Trade Union. See those collars around everyone's necks? They control our minds, make us obedient. Most folks here can barely think for themselves anymore." Jake touched the collar around his own neck. The buzzing was still there, but it felt weaker than before. He wondered if his years of working around radio equipment had somehow made more resistant to whatever technology was controlling everyone. "Else what kind of work do they make us do?" Jake asked. Tom pointed toward the mountain structures. "Crystal mining. Those mountains are full of some kind of energy crystals that power their technology. The work is dangerous. The conditions are terrible, and if you don't meet your daily quota." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Jake looked around more carefully now. There were hundreds of humans scattered across this area, all wearing the same black collars. But that wasn't the strangest part. Mixed in with the humans were creatures Jake had never imagined in his wildest dreams. There were tall, lizard-like beings with scales that changed color in the sunlight. Small, furry creatures with big eyes walked on their hind legs like people. Some beings looked almost like trees but moved around and seemed to be conscious. Jake realized he was looking at slaves from dozens of different planets and species. "This is bigger than just Earth," Jake whispered to himself. A loud horn sounded across the camp. Immediately, all the beings around him started moving toward the mountain structures. Jake noticed how most of the humans moved like robots, their eyes vacant and their steps perfectly synchronized. The collar technology was working exactly as designed on most people. Tom grabbed Jake's arm. "First day is always the hardest. Stay close to me, keep your head down, and do exactly what the overseers tell you. The gray ones from the ship are bad enough, but wait until you meet the others." As they walked toward the mines, Jake got his first look at the variety of creatures running this operation. The gray aliens from the ship were there, but they seemed to be the worker level. Above them were insect-like beings with multiple arms and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. At the top were creatures that looked almost like dragons, with scales and sharp teeth, giving orders to everyone else. The entrance to the mine was like walking into the mouth of a giant beast. The walls were carved smooth and lined with the same glowing crystals they were supposed to be mining. The air inside was even thicker and had a chemical smell that made Jake's eyes water. They were given tools that looked like they were designed for beings much stronger than humans. The energy pickaxes were heavy and hummed with power. Jake watched as Tom showed him how to identify the right kind of crystals and how to extract them without causing a cave-in. The quota is 50 pounds of grade A crystals per day, Tom explained. Don't get caught with grade B mixed in, or they'll cut your food rations in half. Jake started working, but his mind was racing. As a radio operator, he understood energy and electromagnetic fields better than most people. These crystals weren't just power sources, they were incredibly sophisticated technology. The patterns of energy they gave off were more complex than anything humans had ever created. Hours passed. Jake's hands were bleeding from gripping the tools, and his back felt like it was on fire. Around him, other humans worked with mechanical precision, never stopping, never complaining. The collars were doing their job perfectly. But Jake noticed something else. During his lunch break, he observed the alien overseers more carefully. The insect-like beings seemed to be watching everything, but they had routines. They checked certain areas at specific times. They had blind spots in their surveillance. More importantly, Jake realized that his collar was definitely malfunctioning. While other humans could barely hold a conversation, his mind was clear. He could think, plan, and observe. Whatever resistance he had developed from years of radio work was giving him an advantage that could be crucial. He started paying attention to the other species of slaves. The lizard beings communicated through color changes in their scales. The small furry creatures had incredibly good hearing and seemed to know things before they happened. Even some of the tree-like beings appeared to be sharing information through root systems that connected underground. Jake began to wonder if there was more resistance happening than the overseers realized. Maybe other beings had found ways to work around their control systems too. That night, back in the sleeping area, Jake lay on his thin mat and stared up at the alien stars. Tom was sleeping nearby, along with dozens of other humans. Most of them looked peaceful, the collars keeping their minds quiet and compliant. But Jake's mind was anything but quiet. He was starting to form a plan. It would take time, patience, and careful observation. He would need to learn more about the alien technology, figure out the routines of the overseers, and find a way to communicate with other slaves without being detected. Most importantly, he needed to find out if there were others like him, beings whose minds weren't completely controlled by the technology. If there were enough of them, and if they could work together, maybe there was hope for something more than just surviving day by day in this nightmare. Jake closed his eyes and tried to rest, but sleep didn't come easily. Tomorrow would bring another day of backbreaking work in the crystal mines. But it would also bring new opportunities to observe, learn, and plan. He wasn't just a slave anymore. He was a spy in enemy territory, and he was going to find a way to fight back. Jake had been working in the crystal mines for 2 weeks when he first noticed her watching him. The insect-like overseer was different from the others. While most of the alien guards just walked their routes and barked orders, this one seemed genuinely curious about what the slaves were doing. She was about 7 feet tall with a shiny green shell that looked like armor. Her 4 arms moved independently of each other, and her large compound eyes could apparently see in all directions at once. 2 long antennae on her head twitched constantly, like she was sensing things the other overseers couldn't detect. Jake first caught her attention during a cave-in in Section 12. A support beam had cracked, and rocks were falling everywhere. Most of the human slaves just stood there, waiting for orders from their collars. But Jake's mind was still his own. He quickly calculated the stress points and started directing people away from the danger zone. Move left, away from that crack in the ceiling. He called out to Tom, "You 3, get behind that support column." His quick thinking saved at least 6 lives that day. When the dust settled, Jake noticed the green overseer standing at the tunnel entrance. Her compound eyes focused directly on him. Her hands were moving rapidly, like she was trying to figure something out. From that day forward, she seemed to be everywhere Jake was working. If he was assigned to the eastern tunnels, she would patrol that area more often. When he worked the night shift, she would find reasons to inspect his section. Jake started to feel like a bug under a microscope, but something strange was happening. The overseer started making small mistakes in her patrols. She would leave certain areas unguarded for longer than usual. Security cameras would mysteriously malfunction when Jake was working alone. Doors that should have been locked would sometimes be left open. Jake wasn't stupid. He realized she was testing him, giving him opportunities to explore areas he shouldn't have access to. The question was why. Was she setting him up for punishment, or was she genuinely curious about his unusual behavior? One night, Jake decided to take the bait. During his shift, he noticed that the door to the equipment storage room had been left open. He looked around carefully, then slipped inside. The room was filled with alien technology he had never seen before: crystal-powered devices, control panels covered in strange symbols, and what looked like communication equipment. Jake's background in radio technology helped him recognize some of the components. He could see energy flow patterns, frequency modulators, and signal amplifiers. It was incredibly advanced, but it followed logical principles he could understand. He examined a device that looked like it might control the slave collars. He heard a soft clicking sound behind him. He turned around slowly and found himself face to face with the green overseer. Her forearms were crossed, and her antennae were pointed directly at him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Jake expected to be dragged away for punishment, but instead, she did something completely unexpected. She reached out with one of her hands and touched the control panel he had been examining. The device powered up, and symbols began flowing across its surface. Then she did something even more surprising. She began manipulating the controls, showing Jake how the system worked. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like she was teaching him. Jake watched carefully, memorizing every gesture. The overseer's name, he learned later, was Kira. She had been managing mining operations for over 10 years, and she had never seen a human display the kind of intelligence and independence that Jake showed. Most humans were barely conscious after the collar installation, but Jake was solving problems, making plans, and adapting to new situations. Kira's species, the Zentari, had once been slaves themselves. They had earned their freedom through technological innovation and proving their worth to the Galactic Trade Union. But Kira remembered the stories her grandmother told about the old days, when her people were treated like property. Kira began leaving more sophisticated puzzles for Jake to solve. Mathematical equations drawn in the mine dust, complex patterns in the crystal formations that contained hidden information. Technical manuals accidentally left where Jake could find them. Jake quickly proved that he could not only understand the alien technology but improve upon it. He figured out how to increase the efficiency of the mining equipment by 15%. He discovered a way to predict cave-ins by analyzing crystal resonance patterns. Most importantly, he began to understand how the collar control systems worked. Kira found herself looking forward to these secret interactions. Jake's human perspective brought fresh insights to problems she had been dealing with for years. His species might be considered primitive by Galactic Trade Union standards, but his mind was remarkably adaptable. The breakthrough came when Jake showed Kira a crude communication device he had built from discarded crystal fragments. It could send simple messages using electromagnetic pulses that bypassed the standard monitoring systems. Kira realized that Jake might be the key to something much bigger than just improved mining efficiency. She began sharing information about the broader galactic situation. The trade union controlled hundreds of worlds and thousands of species through fear and economic dependence. But there were resistance movements, hidden networks of freed slaves and sympathetic overseers who worked to undermine the system from within. Jake listened to all of this with growing excitement. He wasn't just dealing with his own survival anymore. He was potentially looking at a chance to strike back against the entire system that had enslaved not just humans, but countless other species across the galaxy. But their secret meetings hadn't gone completely unnoticed. The mining station's central AI had begun flagging unusual patterns in the surveillance data. Energy fluctuations in restricted areas, extended patrol times that didn't match standard protocols, minor equipment malfunctions that seemed to happen too often to be coincidental. A report was automatically generated and sent to the trade union's security division. Inspector Vex, a cybernetically enhanced enforcer from the predatory Kazan species, was assigned to investigate potential security breaches at mining station Kappa. Jake and Kira's partnership deepened over the following month. What started as curiosity on Kira's part had grown into something like friendship, though neither of them would have used that word. They were from different worlds, different species, but they shared a common goal: freedom. Kira taught Jake about the structure of the Galactic Trade Union. It wasn't just one species controlling others. It was a complex hierarchy where former slave species could work their way up to overseer positions, but always remained under the control of the original founding races. The Zentari, Kira's people, were middle management at best. My grandmother used to tell stories about the old days, Kira explained during one of their secret meetings. Before we proved ourselves useful, we were worked to death in the fusion plants of Kepler-7. Hundreds of thousands of my people died before we developed the crystal amplification technology that made us valuable. Jake learned that the collar technology wasn't perfect. It worked by suppressing certain brain functions while enhancing others. Most species became compliant and focused only on their assigned tasks. But some individuals, like Jake, had natural resistance due to their brain structure or previous exposure to electromagnetic fields. Your species is new to the trade union, Kira told him. The collar calibration might not be optimized for human neurology yet, that's why you can still think clearly while others cannot. This gave Jake an idea. If the collars could be recalibrated, maybe they could be turned off entirely. He shared this thought with Kira, who was intrigued by the possibility that working together they began developing what they called the Liberation Protocol. It was a complex plan that would require precise timing and coordination across multiple species of slaves. Jake's communication device was just the beginning. They needed a way to disable collars on a massive scale. Kira used her access to the station's technical systems to provide Jake with detailed schematics of the collar network. The devices were all connected to a central control hub that monitored and adjusted their settings. If they could access that hub and upload a virus, they might be able to free everyone at once. But the plan required Jake to physically reach the control hub, which was located in the most heavily guarded section of the mining station. It would be impossible to get there during normal operations. They would need a distraction, something big enough to pull security away from the central systems. As they worked on the technical aspects of their plan, Jake began reaching out to other slaves who showed signs of resistance to their collars. He found a lizard being named Soth who had been pretending to be more controlled than he actually was. A small furry creature called Pip had been using her enhanced hearing to gather intelligence on guard rotations. Even some humans were showing more awareness than expected. Tom, the former teacher, admitted that his collar seemed to be getting weaker over time. A young woman named Riley, who had been a computer programmer before her abduction, retained enough technical knowledge to help with the virus development. Kira was amazed by how quickly Jake was building a network of potential allies. Her species tended to be solitary, but humans seemed naturally inclined to form groups and work together. This might be exactly what the resistance movement needed. The secret communication network grew larger each week. Jake taught others how to build simple transmitters from mining equipment. Messages began flowing between different sections of the station, coordinating activities and sharing information. But their growing network had a weakness. The more people involved, the greater the chance of discovery. And discovery came sooner than they expected. Inspector Vex arrived at the mining station without warning. The Kazan enforcer was everything Kira had feared: ruthless, intelligent, and equipped with cybernetic enhancements that made him nearly impossible to fool. His mission was simple: identify and eliminate any signs of organized resistance. Vex's first action was to upgrade the station's monitoring systems. New sensors were installed throughout the facility, capable of detecting the electromagnetic signatures that Jake's communication devices used. Security patrols were doubled, and random inspections became routine. We have to accelerate the timeline, Kira told Jake during what might be their last secret meeting. Vex will find us eventually. If we're going to act, it has to be now. Jake nodded, understanding the stakes. They had been hoping for more time to prepare, to bring more slaves into their network, to perfect their virus. But sometimes you had to work with what you had. The plan they settled on was risky beyond measure. Jake would use the station's maintenance tunnels to reach the central control hub during the next shift change. Kira would create a distraction by triggering a false emergency in the mining levels. The other resistance members would coordinate simultaneous uprisings in their sections, keeping security forces busy while Jake uploaded the liberation virus. If it worked, thousands of slaves across dozens of species would be freed simultaneously. If it failed, everyone involved would likely be executed as an example to others. Jake spent his last night of slavery making final preparations. He had built the virus to target the specific frequency signatures of the collar control system. Once uploaded, it would propagate through the entire network, causing collars to shut down permanently. But the virus had one requirement that made Jake's stomach churn with anxiety: To upload it properly, someone would have to interface directly with the alien computer system. The process would require linking a human brain to technology that was never designed for organic beings. Kira had warned him that the interface process would likely be fatal. No organic being had ever successfully connected to a trade union central computer and survived. But Jake had one advantage. His years of working with radio signals had given him an unusual understanding of electromagnetic patterns and frequency modulation. If anyone could survive the interface, it might be him, and if he didn't survive, at least he would die knowing that he had struck a blow for freedom that would echo across the galaxy. The morning of the uprising, Jake woke up feeling strangely calm. After weeks of planning and preparation, the day had finally arrived. Around him, other slaves were getting ready for another day of backbreaking work in the crystal mines. They had no idea that before the sun set on this alien world, everything would change. Jake went through his normal routine, but he was secretly checking on the resistance network. Soth, the lizard being, gave him a slight color change in his scales that meant ready. Pip's large ears twitched twice, the signal that the communication devices were functioning properly. Tom nodded almost imperceptibly as they passed in the tunnel. Inspector Vex had been prowling the station for 3 days, and his presence was making everyone nervous. The cybernetically enhanced Kazan had already questioned several slaves and executed two who he suspected of suspicious behavior. His red eyes seemed to see everything, and his mechanical implants gave him abilities that no organic being could match. But Vex's thoroughness might actually work in their favor. He had concentrated most of the security forces in the main mining areas, leaving other sections of the station more lightly guarded than usual. At exactly noon, when the shift change created maximum confusion, Kira triggered the first part of their plan. She activated a false cave-in alarm in the deepest section of the mines. Immediately, emergency teams rushed to respond, pulling guards away from their normal positions. Jake slipped away from his work detail and entered the maintenance tunnel system that Pip had mapped out for him. The small furry creature had incredible hearing and had been able to track guard movements throughout the station for weeks. She had found a route that would get Jake to the central control hub with minimal risk of detection. The tunnels were cramped and filled with the humming of alien machinery. Jake crawled through spaces barely large enough for a human, following the path that Pip had described. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of controlled chaos as the false emergency drew more and more security forces away from the central areas. It took Jake 20 minutes to reach the control hub. The room was exactly as Kira had described, a massive chamber filled with crystalline computers that processed information at incredible speeds. At the center was the interface terminal, a device that looked like a throne made of living metal and glowing crystals. Jake approached the terminal carefully. According to Kira's information, he would have to place his hands on the interface pads and allow the alien technology to connect directly to his nervous system. The computer would then use his brain as a processing unit to upload the liberation virus throughout the entire collar network. Before he could lose his nerve, Jake sat down in the interface chair and placed his hands on the glowing pads. Immediately, electricity shot through his body. But instead of the killing shock he expected, Jake felt something incredible happening. His consciousness began expanding, connecting to computer systems throughout the station. His years of working with radio signals had prepared his brain for this moment in ways he never could have imagined. Instead of being overwhelmed by the alien technology, Jake found that he could understand and control it. He was like a conductor directing a massive electronic orchestra. Through the computer network, Jake could see everything happening on the station. He watched as Soth led a group of reptilian slaves in overpowering their guards. He saw Tom and the other humans working together to disable security cameras in their section. Pip and her people were using their small size and speed to sabotage communication equipment throughout the facility. But most importantly, Jake found the collar control system. It was a massive program that monitored and controlled thousands of devices simultaneously. With his enhanced consciousness, Jake began uploading the liberation virus, watching as it spread through the network like wildfire. One by one, collars throughout the station began shutting down. Slaves who had been mindless workers for months or years suddenly remembered who they were. The sound of breaking chains, both literal and metaphorical, echoed through every corridor. Inspector Vex realized what was happening and raced toward the control hub, but it was too late. The liberation virus had already infected the entire network. Across the station, slaves of dozens of different species were experiencing freedom for the first time in years. Jake tried to disconnect from the interface, but found that his consciousness was somehow stuck in the computer system. The alien technology was trying to absorb his mind completely. For a terrifying moment, he thought he would be trapped forever in the electronic maze of the trade union's computers. But then he remembered something Kira had taught him about crystal resonance frequencies. Instead of fighting the system, Jake began working with it, using his understanding of electromagnetic patterns to create a harmony between his organic brain and the alien technology. The result was extraordinary. Jake didn't just disconnect from the system, he took control of it. With his hybrid organic electronic consciousness, he could access trade union networks throughout the galaxy. He sent the Liberation virus to other mining stations, prison planets, and slave facilities across dozens of star systems. When Jake finally opened his eyes back in the control room, the station was in chaos. Freed slaves were taking control of guard posts and communication centers. Kira burst into the room with a group of armed former slaves behind her. "Jake, are you alive? The whole station is going crazy. Every collar on the facility just shut down at once." Jake smiled weakly. The interface process had changed him in ways he was still discovering, but he was definitely alive. More than alive, he felt like he had become something new, a bridge between organic and artificial intelligence. Through the station's communication system, they began receiving messages from across the galaxy. The Liberation virus had worked even better than they had hoped. Slave uprisings were breaking out on dozens of worlds simultaneously. The carefully controlled order of the Galactic Trade Union was collapsing, but their celebration was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Vex and his remaining security forces. The cybernetic Kazan was not going to give up without a fight. He activated the station's self-destruct sequence, intending to destroy everyone rather than allow the rebellion to succeed. Jake, still connected to the station's computer systems through his enhanced abilities, detected the self-destruct activation. With seconds to spare, he managed to override the sequence, but not before sending out a powerful distress signal using the station's deep space transmitters. The signal reached members of the hidden resistance network that Kira had told him about. Within hours, ships began arriving at the mining station, not trade union vessels, but a fleet of liberated worlds and resistance fighters who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Jake watched from the station's observation deck as the rescue fleet approached. Earth was represented. Among the ships, apparently, some humans had escaped their initial capture and had been working with the Galactic Resistance for months. The young man who had started this adventure as a simple radio operator monitoring space signals had become something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness capable of bridging the gap between organic beings and artificial intelligence. His unique abilities made him invaluable to the growing rebellion against the trade union, but more importantly, Jake had proven that freedom was possible. The Liberation virus continued spreading across the galaxy, freeing slaves and inspiring uprisings on world after world. The trade union's empire, built on the suffering of countless beings, was finally beginning to crumble. As Jake prepared for the journey back to Earth, he knew that his life would never be normal again. He had become humanity's first ambassador to a galaxy in revolution, carrying the responsibility of representing his species in the larger fight for freedom among the stars. The radio operator who had once listened for signals from space had become the signal that awakened an entire galaxy to the possibility of liberation.